Hello, YouTube. Long time no see. Yeah, my schedule's been really busy, but I haven't forgotten about you. Why don't we kiss and make up some other time, and let's get down to business. So I wanted to examine this whole reverse racism thing again, and in general, reverse discrimination, because I was spurred on recently by this Facebook post that my friend sent me from his now former friend. This former friend of his is a minority. She's Asian, just like me, just like my friend. And she wrote this long ass rant on her Facebook profile about why white people are racist and systemically so, and why Asians and other minorities couldn't possibly be racist, even if they do the same thing, given their social position on the hierarchy. All of you are probably familiar with my views on this. And I've already expressed quite a lot of these sentiments in my previous video, which I'll link down below. But I think that there are a couple of interesting things that are worth discussing. And I never really found the opportunity to do so until I started delving deeper into this subject matter. And by delving deeper, I mean going into Google, typing in reverse discrimination and reverse racism, and clicking the first article that pops up. So the first article that popped up for me is one that was on the Daily Dot, another one of those social justice rags on the internet. And this is an opinion piece titled 7 Reasons Why Reverse Discrimination Does Not Exist. Number 1, racism equals privilege plus power. Off to a great start already. In order to be racist, you need to possess 2 traits. The first is privilege, a structural, institutional, and social advantage. White people occupy positions of racial privilege, even when they are disadvantaged in other ways. White women, for example, consistently make more than black women because they benefit from racial attitudes. Furthermore, you also have to have power, the ability, backed up by society, to be a strong social influencer with greater leeway when it comes to what you do, where, and how. For instance, white people benefit from privilege and power when they aren't arrested for drug crimes at disproportionate rates, while black people experience racism when they're arrested and sentenced for the same crimes. This reflects a racialized power imbalance in the justice system. It's about the privilege and power of white offenders, less likely to be racially profiled, more likely to have strong legal representation, more likely to be able to talk to police officers out of an arrest, and the lack of social status for black offenders. People of color talking about white people don't occupy positions of privilege or power, therefore they cannot be racist. Racism is structural, not personal. As many of you have noticed, I really dislike using these social justice warrior types of terms like privilege and power because they can be defined in so many ways, and not one definition is universally acceptable or applicable. Because how do you really quantify power? I mean, sure, you can say that in extreme cases, a rich person might be more powerful and have more influence and have more options available than someone who lives out on the street. Okay, but things aren't always that black and white, and for the majority of people, they're not privy to that kind of power. Social justice warriors in general like to pretend, in my opinion, that every single powerful or considered powerful group in society all acts together. Like all rich people are just one conglomerate, or all white people, or all straight people are one universal force that is working to oppress the minorities of the world. And more often than not, I think that is not the case. I will say, though, that being a minority also comes with its perks. Namely, that there is a lot of overcompensation for these minority groups when it comes to things like PC speech, giving them job opportunities. You know, it seems like so many people are trying to avoid being seen as racist or sexist or homophobic, and they just go one step further and they try and specifically cater to these particular groups. And I mean, white people will never get that. Straight people will never get that. And I'm not saying they should. I'm just saying that it's a fact of life that, yes, certain groups have more power, certain groups have more opportunities and privilege, if you like. But at the same time, not having these things doesn't mean that you are automatically at a disadvantage. Number two, anger is a legitimate response to oppression. When reverse racism is flung around, it's often in response to angry language, to protests, to fights for equality. People of color have been pushing back on privilege and power for a long time. Many of them are understandably pretty tired of it. Unsurprisingly, some aren't interested in moderating their tone for a white audience. This means that sometimes they use strong language out of frustration, rage, or to make a heavy impact on observers. Still not reverse racism. More importantly, insisting that people of color need to be nice about the way they talk about racism is in fact racist. It suggests, for example, that angry black women don't merit social attention because they're being unreasonable. I don't think anyone worth listening to has ever had a problem with people sounding rude or angry. I myself have had absolutely no reservations of being either of those two things, and I have been, and I will continue to be, because that shit doesn't matter. When you're talking about things that are worth discussing, it doesn't matter what way you present them. All that matters is whether or not those points are logically and empirically sound. Calling someone a white skanky hoe or calling someone a cracker is no different than calling a black person a nigger or calling me a gook or a chink. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter what color the other person's skin is. Racism is racism. And yeah, there's been historic discrimination in North America from whites against Asians and blacks and other people of color. But you know what? That doesn't make racism from people of color towards white people any more acceptable. It's not. It should not be justified as such. And if we really are fighting for equality as people of color, then why do you want this special treatment, this double standard, where if you say something racist, that's not considered racism, but if some white person calls you a discriminatory name, somehow that's racism? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Number three, attempts to rectify systemic injustices are not examples of reverse racism. One of the most common pieces of evidence used as proof of reverse racism is that of affirmative action and minority admissions at colleges, universities, and some companies. The argument goes that people of color are stealing positions and jobs away from better or equally qualified white people. This is not the case. The problem is that generations of injustice have resulted in underrepresentation of people in color in these settings, and the goal of affirmative action and related initiatives is to ensure that they aren't harmed by racial bias in admissions and hiring decisions. People of color aren't admitted or hired over white people, they're considered equally, with an eye to the fact that subconscious bias may be influencing decisions made by people in power who are, you guessed it, often white. I have to do a more detailed video on affirmative action, but I can definitely understand some white person's resentment towards these types of programs. And I would be too. In fact, I am. I don't want to be judged based on my skin color. I want to be judged purely on merit. And if I am equally as talented as the other guy, then I better damn well prove that I'm better than the other guy, regardless of whether he's white or not white. I mean, am I crazy here? Is this not a meritocracy anymore? Do people not value judging others based on merit? Or have we just grown so accustomed to this speak of, oh, my boss just doesn't like people of color. My boss just doesn't like gay people. And yes, these types of people exist. I'm not saying they don't. They definitely do. Certain attitudes may even exist in some companies, in some areas of society. But we really have to stop using this as an excuse. We really have to get on our hands and knees, get to work, and then maybe if there's sufficient evidence to justify discrimination, then we'll talk. Number 4, having spaces set aside for people of color is not racist. Whites are often resentful of clubs, organizations, and groups focused on people of a specific race, with membership closed to people who are not members of that racial community. The claim goes that such groups segregate and discriminate. After all, if members of those minorities cared so much about racism, they'd be open to their membership to all, right? It's not just that every public space is open to white people, but that white people have an expectation that every private space should be open to them too. Some conversations and community events need to take place behind closed doors. People of color may need to have sensitive conversations about discrimination, racism, and their lived experiences that are difficult to have when they're surrounded by white observers or people who talk over them. Such spaces provide a medium for doing so, such as members of the LGBTQ community using retreat spaces, and women joining women-only organizations and groups for mutual support. I have absolutely no issue with people making a club and only accepting certain members into said club. That's up to them. That's their thing. They want to do that, fine. And if that means I can't join in the discussion, that's fine. But if you want to talk about equality and you want to talk about making things equal, I don't think this is a very productive way to do it. If you want these discussions to be open, and then you're missing literally half the audience if you're eliminating white people from topics of discrimination and racism. And further demonizing them, saying they all work as this collective group trying to oppress you, that's not helpful to the conversation either. Number 5, white people are not oppressed. The history of the oppression of people of color by the West, and by extension white people, spans centuries. Africans were enslaved and brought to New World, where European colonies stole land from indigenous people. Colonies across the global south brought untold wealth into the coffers of Europe, the low, low cost of suffering for native populations. And it goes on and on and on. So, my group of people has always been historically oppressed compared to your group of people. And it's still the case that my group of people is more oppressed than your group of people. Therefore, if I do something that may be considered wrong, it's not nearly as bad as when you do it to me. Does anyone see the problem with this logic? Why don't we take something like, I don't know, a murder, okay? Let's say a black person murders a white person. So, historically, white people have lynched and discriminated against black people in the past. You can argue that maybe they continue to do so today. So I guess it's perfectly permissible, or at least less taboo, when a black person murders a white person, right? Of course not! Murder is murder. Racism is racism. Why are we pretending as if social position has anything to do with the fact that these acts are wrong, and universally so? What happened to everyone is equal before the eyes of the law? And what happened to these virtues of equality that social justice warriors claim they're fighting for? Getting some sort of special status where you can be racist and another person can be racist and you won't be considered racist? That's not equality. That's just you trying to gain more privilege compared to another group. That's selfish. Number 6, prejudice and racism are not the same thing. Some people of color may view whites prejudicially. No wonder, given the interactions of racism in society. Anyone can believe in stereotypes or hold ideas about members of other groups that are not entirely accurate. However, being and behaving prejudicially isn't the same thing as racism, especially when prejudice punches up, not down. I have no idea what this means. Number 7, hard truths aren't racist. They're just hard to hear. Making a racist statement is a manifestation of racist culture. Being mean isn't. For whites, it can be difficult to be confronted with the reality of racism, and with comments from people of color about how privilege and power operate. It's tempting to take such comments personally and insist that people of color are being mean, which is often a hop, skip, and jump away from an accusation of reverse racism. I love how the writer of this article and other like-minded people are just dismissing these criticisms from allegedly white people only as just they think we're being mean. No, I mean, yes, you're being mean, but that's not the reason why I have a problem with this article. As a minority, I have a problem with this article because it's logically flawed and because it involves holding two different standards, one for white people and one for non-white people. And as someone that grew up in Canada, as someone that has hung around both people of color and people that are white, that's unacceptable. I don't buy that. And I hope other people aren't stupid enough to buy into that. Thanks for watching. May the truth always be heard. Peace.